Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined by my co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
What did you say? Reapers never. My ears ain't as good as they used to be.
I get because we've got two old guys on the show. I guess that's how this is going to go today, huh?
Oh, God. Yeah, apparently Bobby was recording the pre-show audio, so, yeah, you guys are going to have to listen to No Religion Required for that one.
So, we're going to have a conversation today about hope after faith. So, good friends Jerry and Bobby have a new podcast called Hope After Faith, and it's all about, it's pretty self-explanatory, but to that end,
how atheists are sad and crying all the time because we have no Jesus.
I saw a sign on a church that made me want to strangle someone. It was...
That's real bad. You should work on that anger.
Life without God is like an unsharpened pencil. No point.
But bump.
Right, yeah.
So was it the
silence
sentiment
was very
behind
telling.
it that made you angry, or was it the terrible pun?
No, it wasn't the pun, because you know how much I love puns.
Terrible puns.
I love terrible puns. So, on the show today, we've got a friend of mine named John, and I'm not going to go too much into his story. I'm just going to let him tell his story. So, John, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, tell us a little bit about your story.
All right.
And when you started masturbating.
Well, got real.
Sorry, wait, wrong show.
Went all the way in real personal right away, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I'm John, obviously. My story is I started out, being the regular kid where you went to church because your parents told you had to go to church, and then that kind of became your network of friends that just centered around youth group, and youth group was more kind of just like fun times and games, and I got to go to cool shows, and that's where I started getting into like metal music and all kind of the music scene and that kind of stuff. And so a lot of my friends centered along that until I found friends that were more fun because they did all the stuff that Christians weren't supposed to do. And then I started doing that, and that led me into a really kind of a dark spiral period of my life where I was just not a good person, but trying to be a good person because I felt like that's what I should be, but then I was having more fun not being, and it kind of led me really down, like I said, a dark path, and then that ended up morphing into I met a girl that was a very like strong, devoted, devout Christian, and I wanted to date her, and she said honestly that I needed to start going to church with her if we were going to start dating. And so I went to church, and I spent the next 8 years trying to figure out church and where I belonged in it. And after that 8-year period, I figured out I didn't belong in it, and now I'm here without
That is really
church.
interesting, because I think that's the first time that I ever heard someone say that they joined Christianity to date someone. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Have you, Callie? Have you heard that?
In all seriousness, I have actually. Like, I had a friend who told me, like, she was Christian, and this was before I was really into like atheist activism or anything like that. Not that that matters. I still have Christian friends. But she told me that like a bunch of her church friends were literally getting married just so they could have sex with each other. Like, because they could do it morally then.
I think this is further proof that I need to work on my sarcasm being more obvious, because apparently you thought I was serious.
Oh.
God damn it.
Well, I fail. Epic fail.
Yeah.
I think it's me for being too good at acting.
Oh.
And
That's a good thing.
So I mean, what led you out? What made, was there a certain thing that made you start questioning that you were like, I'm not really sure if this makes sense for me, or?
Well, I started going to her church, which was very highly spiritual church. And
what do you mean by highly spiritual?
like very speaking of hope after faith, very much speaking in tongues, very that sort of highly spiritual,
Pentecostal kind of thing.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, I was telling the story before the show that like I always insisted on going to adult church with my grandma, and it was a Pentecostal church.
Yeah,
and I literally because my grandma's very much like demon possession is a thing and all this, and I legitimately thought, because no one had warned me about speaking in tongues, that I thought there was someone possessed by a demon in the church the first time that happened.
That's really similar. She didn't warn me. I grew up in a Methodist church where it's pretty much like a Protestant version of Catholicism is what I call Methodism. But anyways, and so she didn't warn me. So I go there and like a dude blows a ram's horn and like speaking in tongues and people like waving banners. And it was just like, I was like, what just happened? Like, is this? And she's like, oh, it's just Sunday. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that this existed at all.
Just normal people stuff.
But
my grandma's church had that. There were banners and they had people with the tambourines and like running up and down the aisle, yelling and screaming. And it was
intriguing. And honestly, like it does get your like, I don't know, like it puts your, skin on needles kind of thing. And,
it gets you in the moment.
Exciting. Yeah. And it's very, just a hyper intense situation. But so we went there.
I'm so glad that I only went to like apathetic people church, because that would have terrified me as a kid.
Yeah. But so we went there and I wasn't into it because it was like a church of like 2,000 people, and I went to a church of like 150 people when I was a kid, so it was just too much for me. So we tried somewhere else, and then I didn't like the way that they did a lot of stuff there because I didn't feel like it matched up with what I understood from what I was reading from the Bible. So then we went somewhere else. And then, like, that place was going well, but then I felt like they were biblically on point, but then I couldn't ever match up what biblically on point they were saying they were, because it was very, like, Reformed Calvinist type of thing. And so I'm like, you guys get the Bible right.
Explain what that means.
It means... Oh, geez. That's a really long conversation. It basically means that, like... Their central thing is that, like, you're either predestined for hell or you're predestined for heaven, and like things
predestination
are very
is the
determined, like by God ahead of time, all this other stuff. And I was just like, I could never get on board with like someone being predestined for hell. And I literally ended up not too long ago telling one of my friends, I'm like, I can't believe in a God that would do that. And he's like, well, that's the God of the Bible. And I'm like, well, then I can't believe in the God of the Bible anymore because I'm just done. And that's kind of where... but leading up to that, I was reading a lot of different books. I read a book, something Montgomery, it's called Rocks Don't Lie, where he goes through like actual how geology works and how it shows that like a global flood couldn't happen. Mm-hmm. So they're just pointing out how, the Noah flood, it just is impossible according to the records and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, if that part's not real, then like what is real, what isn't real? That led me to a book called Peter Enns, called Incarnation and Inspiration, where he kind of explains through, there was different authors, and some of it was like more of just the spiritual experience of people, and some of it was like potentially actually God. I'm like, okay, well, like then what parts? And that led me to lead a book called A History of God, where it went through that. And by the time I was done with that, I'm like, all of this is just essentially writings of what people experienced and how they explain the world around them in the context they could understand. And I'm like, I don't really need, I can't believe any of this to where it's going to like, to where I feel like I should continue to devote my time to figuring it out anymore. I need to figure out a way that I can go about my life without needing this type of stuff. So
yeah, that makes sense. And so how we started talking was we were talking on a mutual friend's Facebook thread, and you saw that I went to the recording workshop, which is the audio production school that I went to, and you went as well.
Yeah.
And so you added me as a friend, and we started talking, and then and we started private messaging each other, and we actually I thought we had some really great conversations about theology and all of that kind of stuff. So it was kind of surprising because, those conversations tapered off, and then you sent me a message probably 2 or 3 months later and said, so I'm not Christian anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it was actually one of the things that you said. I can't remember exactly how you worded it. I tried to have time to look back, but there's a lot of messages.
Yeah.
So, but something along the lines of like defining more clearly like agnostic versus atheist or whatever. And essentially what I took from it, I don't know if that's what you meant from it, but was like agnostic is almost just like the people that this is going to sound real, the people that are like too afraid to make the step to say that I know there isn't a God, like they're just kind of like in this middle point or something.
It's not so much that for me because the way that I see it is, Gnostic or agnostic is a knowledge claim, and theist versus atheist is a belief claim. And I think every atheist by definition is agnostic because we can't claim to know for sure anything. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that's why I don't use the term.
Some people claim that they're Gnostic, but
that's true, and I don't think it. I think I don't know. I think you can defend to some degree a positive claim that God doesn't exist, but to say like knowledge and surety, I don't know that you could defend that. I think that's a little out there. So what you described really is kind of the problem of evil, right? The idea that this person this deity who is supposed to be all loving and all knowing and the paragon of moral virtue is going to condemn someone to hell, or that they don't even have a choice, that they were brought into this world to be condemned to hell. Was that really the main catalyst? Were there other things? Like what was your thought process going through all of that?
Yeah, I mean, that was a big thing for me, especially, just to put it out, I like realized that I was bisexual when I was in high school, and then kind of like had, a relationship involving that. And then after that was over, I'm like, well, I don't really even know anymore. Like, and it was so stigmatized because this was 2000-ish. So it was still like, and I'm like, I really don't want to, like, I was already having a lot of issues with, I had changed schools, and I was trying to figure out like who I was and who was my friend and who wasn't my friend. And I'm like, I don't need to add this like layer of, so I just kind of like forgot about it and like pushed it down. And then once I started figuring out, like trying to figure out the Bible and all this other stuff, like those two came into, like, it came back up, and I'm like, oh man, like what do I do with all this stuff?
When you say it came back up, you mean like the feelings of being bisexual and trying to figure out who you are in that context?
Yeah, I mean, the feelings never went away, but just actually facing like, okay, am I wrong for feeling this way or not? And then I like came to the point where I'm like no, like there's just not enough there for me to say that it's wrong. And that being like, okay, so then those people, like, we're not gonna go to hell. And then I started like figuring out like, okay, I don't know, I started reading other stuff where it's just like there's Christians that don't believe hell exists, that it's just like separation from God, so then you're just like fizzle out into like nothingness or whatever.
Yeah, I think Seventh-day Adventists believe that. I think
and then like certain people
become
go
like
to heaven.
You just get like annihilated, like you just don't exist anymore. Like hell isn't necessarily a thing.
And there's like actual death.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So basically, like, and then I'm just like, okay, but then like, if there isn't that, then like, what about all this other stuff? And it's just, I spent 8 years trying to connect all these dots, and then it just came to the point where I'm like, I just don't care enough to connect these dots anymore. And I just kind of like, literally just like closed the book, and I'm like, this is some really great stuff. I know all of the great stuff from it. I want to kind of move on to something else at that point. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned being bisexual, and this is, feel free to decline if you don't want to talk more about this. But I remember you telling me a story initially when we had talked, when you were talking about trying to figure out your sexuality. It involves a car wreck, if memory serves. Are you okay with telling that story?
Yeah. I mean, I basically, this is the weirdest thing, is that like, I had two like very intense spiritual, quote unquote, I'm using quote unquote on a podcast because
I hear you.
That like I totaled my car, and when I totaled my car, like I felt something like hold me up against the seat or whatever, and that like was what led me to then having another spiritual experience at a church, to where like I felt where they had shown, I don't know, there's this girl, they made a movie out of it with, anyways, where like her arm got bit off by a shark and like how that was like redeemed for Christ and all this other stuff.
I think I remember what you're talking about. Yeah.
They played some of that, like her story, and it reminded me of my story, and I had like a Jesus moment or whatever. And then I like those were my catalysts for like what caused me to even like try and figure it all out. And it just came to a point to where there's a guy, his name's Science Mike. It's Mike Maharg or something, where he kind of tries to, I listen to his podcast still, but he tries to kind of interfuse to show where like science and spirituality don't like have to be these things that butt up against each other and all this stuff. And from some of those resources made me realize that like sometimes our body just like our mind and all these things tries to explain things that don't make sense in like really crazy ways that can make sense, just because like if we don't make sense of it, then we'll like get stuck in it and go crazy. I'm not sure how that relates to what you asked me though. I can't remember exactly.
Well, if memory serves, because you had mentioned something about how you were experimenting with those feelings, and what it sounded like to me at the time, based on what you had told me, is like, okay, so you're someone who had these feelings and you explored those feelings, and then at some point figured out like, oh, okay, maybe that's not me. Right. And in my mind, like that's a perfectly normal thing to do. People sexually experiment, especially if you're young. That's all fine. But you were kind of, if I remember the conversation right, basically you were kind of using that as like one of the like a struggle that God put on you to teach you a lesson or something along those lines. Like, was that I think that was kind of the trajectory of the conversation.
Yeah, it was kind of almost like a thing of where I don't know, like some people believe like you're afflicted with things so that then you have to go through them to make you like stronger for that. So then I was almost like using it as like, well, since I've gone through those things, but then like I can put those things aside and then use that as a part of my story to like minister to the people that also struggle with those things or whatever. And so like that's kind of how I just like explained it away. But then like those feelings never went away, and I'm just like, what do I do with these things? And in all honesty, I had been like hiding them from my wife at the time and all this stuff, and like, you know, that's never like a good thing for anyone to ever do, is to hide part of who they are and what they deal with. And so by not like her causing, it was my own decision, and I kind of just tried to figure out, I'm like, well, I don't want to be that anymore, because like that's caused all these other things, and that's kind of what I thought at the time. And then as time progressed and I tried to work them out, like, no, like I can be that and like it be okay versus be that and it not be okay kind of thing. And so it was really difficult to like work through that. And unfortunately, like working through that through being married caused marriage to end by no fault of hers, is what I'm realizing. It was more so just like I created a situation to where she was attached to someone that like she wasn't going to be able to continue to be attached to based off of her, you know, beliefs and all this stuff. And I kind of set her up for failure in that way. So,
well, I think the idea is that you tried to create this version of yourself because this is what you thought was the right thing at the time.
Yeah.
And that's what, that version of yourself was what she was in a relationship with, and she didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I think that's the sad thing so many times in these conversations, because it's a lot of times in a place where nobody really did anything wrong.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like there's so much pressure in society to be one thing or another that, you know, we convince ourselves that we are these things and we put on those roles, and it feels good at first, and then eventually it's, I can't handle this anymore. And then the truth comes out, and then, you know, it's, oh my gosh, they changed. And it's like, no, like they just took the mask off.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that's essentially like how it was. It's like, it's what it's coming down to is like, it's not really her fault. And I've been dealing with, you know, myself putting my own guilt on it or whatever. Cause it's like, man, if I would have just like not made that decision back then to like present myself or try and make myself into something that I thought was going to be right, and just like embraced who I was, and like I could look and say now, like, oh well, if I would have been born like 5 to 10 years later, I probably wouldn't have had to go through any of that, because there's far more resources now for people to have, like, because when I was growing up, there wasn't the internet yet. Like, you had an AIM screen name, and that was like the most you did with the internet.
Yep, that's where I was too.
And so like there wasn't these like groups of people on Facebook where you could constantly like talk back and forth. There wasn't like, you know, a center downtown for all these people that you could go to or whatever. It was kind of like you existed in the shadows and all this stuff. It was, so it would have turned out different. That's why I'm thankful for it. You know, one of my extended family members is, you know, just recently, a couple of years ago, like came out as gay, and he had some issues at first, but like he was able to work through a lot of it because there's a community that's very much in the open for him to be a part of. And I'm super thankful that he didn't have to end up going through all of what I ended up going through as much. So that's a good thing.
Very much is. So where are you at today? Do you call yourself an atheist? Is there a label for it? How are you, now that you're sort of at the end of one journey and the beginning of another, I guess is kind of the way to put it. Like, where are you at? How are you feeling about the whole thing?
Jerry and Bobby C will like this. I kind of just am calling myself a recovering Christian. Like, I feel like I have like religion PTSD kind of thing, to where like I still have like the guilt of like, well, you know, maybe I am still gonna go to hell. I don't know. Like, you know, like, and it's kind of this thing where like you have to shed off like. And there's, I think you had said something on one of the podcasts or whatever. It was interesting listening to the theme song. I'm like, usually I'm by myself, not talking, about to talk to the person that hosts this. But like you had said something about like you still have urges of like when you're in moments of despair to like pray, and then you're like, wait a second, like I don't believe in what I'm about to pray. Like, I don't believe in the person that I'm about to pray to.
I wasn't even steeped in, like, my religious upbringing was pretty mild in comparison, and I still, even for a very long time, it was always in the back of my head, like, God, what if that's actually real? Like, I don't think it is, but what if, you know?
Yeah.
The whole, like, playing Pascal's wager with myself, and, like, the rational side of my brain knows better, but the emotional side of my brain is like, yeah, but what if? Because that would really suck.
The emotional side is so much quicker than, like, the reasoning side that, like, you have to like hold up emotional side, like let my reasoning catch up. Oh wait, that's right. Like exactly. I don't believe this anymore.
Right.
So it's been difficult. I'm actually fortunate that I was a part of a church that is pretty open with having people that don't stand with them on their beliefs and stuff like that. So I still like go to their community group that they do every week or whatever. So I still go and like hang out with them. I'm still able to like have those friendships, even though we're not like on the same page spiritually anymore and things like that. So like,
yeah, that's awesome. Cause that's a really common thing. People losing their entire like social community.
Oh yeah.
So that's really awesome. Actually, that's really great.
Yeah. I lost like my best friend, like when it first came along, like, and that was like, it's great that I have all these other friends that like are still like, you know, able to walk, you know, through just general life with me and still like be able to hang out with them and have fun. But like the best friend, and then at the same time like no longer being a part of my wife's life because of all this other stuff that's going on, like those kind of happen at the same time. And that's where I was just like, I'm just gonna throw my hands up on this stuff now.
Right.
But yeah, so it's still in progress. Like once I kind of trying to figure stuff out, I would probably like, I really have read through and kind of side most with like the secular humanist kind of deal or whatever. And so like, that's probably where I'll end up landing eventually once I, you know, recover from my Christianity.
I definitely don't want to put any pressure. I was just curious if you had, you know, if you had a word for it yet, or if you were still kind of working that out.
I'm kind of annoyed with labels right now. I feel like there's so many of them.
Yeah, well, especially when it comes to religion.
You in a box. Oh yeah. You know, and you know, speaking of schisms from earlier, Ari, like it's just like, you know, so many that you can't count them all with your appendages kind of thing when it comes to that stuff. So like, I'm kind of just trying to not care about a label for a while, just because.
Well, figure out where you're at first, and then you can maybe find a word for it.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Sure.
Cool. All right.
But then how are you going to know who's on your side and who you have to fight against and hate?
That's a fair question. I think that's a journey too.
I hate everyone that gets in my way.
All right. Well,
No.
we're going to take a quick break.
We're friends now.
We're going to take a quick break. John's going to stick around. After the break, we're going to have Jerry DeWitt and Bobby C. More Gaytheist Manifesto right after this.
I've struggled with confidence throughout my life, and I've struggled with shame and internalized transphobia and internalized racism and internalized classism. And so I have all that stuff, but there was something in me believed I had something special. Telling the truth to myself about myself is awesome because it's just a relief because I don't have to try to be something I'm not. I can just be. Who you are authentically is all right. The shame is what kills you. Believing that you are unworthy of love and belonging, that who you are authentically is a sin or is wrong is deadly. Who you are is beautiful and amazing. It's important with all of the messages that might tell you otherwise, that you have that in yourself to say that I am beautiful, I'm smart, and I'm amazing.
The staff of Secular Coalition for America lobbies U.S. Congress on issues of separation of church and state, and they've become a powerhouse for change in the United States government. You'll definitely want to subscribe to receive their email action alerts. These are updates for important issues and ones that you can get involved with directly. And hopefully, you'll consider making a contribution to the Secular Coalition for America to help them continue fighting for your equality. You can do it all at secular.org.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Big shout out this week to Peter, Brian, Rex, Clara, Kristen, We3, Michelle, and James. Thank you all so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons-only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. Joining us this segment, Jerry DeWitt and Bobby C. of the Hope After Faith podcast. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Hey, Jerry.
Hey, Bobby.
So you guys were listening in as we were talking to John about his story. So I'm just curious, do you have any reaction, any thoughts, anything that you wanted to share?
I actually wrote something down as he was talking because I wanted to make sure that I remembered to share it.
Ooh, taking notes. Nice preparedness, Bobby.
I
Are you
love
in the
it.
Boy Scouts?
He's a professional, a consummate professional.
No, I'm old and have a terrible memory.
Oh, okay. We weren't going to say that.
Yeah.
Had to.
Oh, and by the way, hi, John. How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
What I wrote down was the hardest thing to do is live a secret life. That is so hard to do when you're feeling something inside of you and you're dealing with the religion aspect of it, and you want so badly to express yourself with your own expression, only to have that, stifled by your religion. And when you were talking about that, I kind of thought about that as you were talking.
Jerry, did you have any thoughts?
I was made a little sad over the fact of how familiar the story is. This is something that countless people are walking through. This is a journey that so many of us are having to take in very, very similar steps because of the time period that we're living in, because of the culture that we share, because of the state of evangelical Christianity today. I was very proud of John that he was able to, I think when you move from regular evangelical Christian doctrine to something that once upon a time was more mainstream, such as Calvinism, it shows that you really do have a heart for truth. You're looking for truth, and you're willing to investigate all the different corners of the theological theater. And I'm very, very, very proud of him that he's made this journey.
Well, and I think it shows a very ingrained sense of compassion too, because you've been taught this thing your entire life, but there's still this thing inside of you that says like, no, like I've been taught my entire life that this is how this is, but it just feels wrong. This doesn't make sense to me. And you're able to question that, just because of your innate sense of morality. I think that I think that says a lot for the heart that you have, but also I think the sort of ingrained sense of morality that a lot of people don't think that people have without religion. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. I listened to all the Hope After Faith because Callie actually recommended him to me when I messaged her about me
Shameless
going through
plug.
it. Yep.
Shameless.
But
your check's in the mail.
yes.
Wink, wink.
1 cent coming to me. No. But just kind of some of the things that were going through on that as far as what was said, I was just like, oh man, like this is really great for me to hear right now, and so it's been great. She had mentioned that I think Jerry would be on, but not Bo. So it's actually like really cool because I'm really excited to keep listening, and I can't wait to read the Hope After Faith book and all that because it's been genuinely helpful. So now I get to thank you guys sort of in person, but so
it's close enough.
I also would like to kiss all of your asses.
Welcome to the Scourgy. So, but I would, pun intended, I would like to back up just a little bit and say I do want to give you full credit since we're having a love, feast here. Yep. I do want to give you for having a heart that took you in the direction that it did. I have to use a phrase that was coined by Mike Williams, which is the founder of the Gospel Revolution out of Houston, Texas, where he asked the question, he says, is your heart kinder than your doctrine? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a phenomenal question. And to be honest with you, the people say the theist now that I spend my time dealing with or trying to be in communication with, the only ones I'm interested in talking to are the ones that very quickly and obviously show me that their heart may actually be kinder than their doctrine. And a good example of that in your life is when you make it into Calvinism and you're like, it just doesn't make sense to me that some people might actually be predestined to hell. Just the fact that you got to Calvinism trying to deal with eternal punishment, because I did that same thing. Mm-hmm. That is the very same journey that I went on, and I passed through the corridors of Calvinism as well and had the same questions while I was there, was how does this work?
Yeah.
Well, for some people, their heart is not kinder than their doctrine, and they're just like, sucks to be you. All the people predestined to go to hell. Yeah. I'm glad I'm not one of you. And so it's really about, that's why I don't use the phrase that I lost my faith. Sometimes there might be the right situation to throw that out there like that because people recognize it, it resonates with them, they know what you mean. But I like to say I graduated from my religion, and I feel like the test of my religious experience was actually testing my humanity. Mm-hmm. Could I settle for a doctrine that was inhumane or was less humane than I am? And so, congratulations, and don't worry about all those damn labels. No. Screw the internet.
Right. Yeah. The thing with Calvinists, real quick, that makes me I just could never wrap my head around it is they like to use the whole like, a diamond up against a black cloth makes it brighter. So then like saying that like people going to hell is the black cloth and like Jesus is the diamond. We exist to make you look better. And I was just really like, what it is? Whoa, like I can't handle the fact of like, oh well, like I get like Jesus gets to look so much better because like those people are screwed. Like I just couldn't ever. And like a lot of Calvinists are like, oh, I don't like that, and I'm like, yeah, but it kind of like frames it pretty well. Like you can't like, yeah, you don't like it, but
the fact that you don't like it doesn't make it not true.
Right? Yeah. So, anyways,
and it is exactly what the portions of the Bible that the Calvinist doctrine is built upon. It is exactly what is taught in the Bible. Those, we're paraphrasing. I'd have to take a few minutes to find the scriptures, but it is there, and it does express that very thought. There are vessels that are shapened unto glory and honor, and there are vessels that are shapened for dishonor. And Paul even uses Old Testament stories where he says Pharaoh's heart was hardened so that God could reveal his power. And, that's the diamond against the black cloth. And so I commend you for that, not just, as I've already said, because of how humane you were in looking at doctrine, but also that you were actually looking at doctrine.
Right.
That is an anomaly in modern evangelical Christianity, to actually look at the doctrine and say, I wonder if I stood on the other side of the room and looked back at myself believing that, what would I see?
Yeah. Yeah, that was actually pretty strong tenets of the church that I left and was a part of for the longest period here in Hamilton and in Ohio, was that they were very much like, we don't want to just like take it, just today, like, just because a preacher says it, don't believe it kind of thing. Like, actually figure it out for yourself, unbeknownst to them, like that.
Right. For some people, that's dangerous advice.
Church, but hey, they can't help who leaves, and then, if it comes down to it and I, stay the course that I'm on, so to speak, or whatever, then, I'm one of those black cloth people now or whatever. And so then that just proves them right to a degree or something. But anyways.
Well, and so how do we get there? We talked a little bit about John's story and how he came to question, Jerry or Bobby, whoever wants to go first. I know you were both, obviously, that's the entire reason that Jerry is in the movement in the first place, is because he used to be a preacher. But Bobby, you were very religious as well, and I'm curious, because there's so much debate over how we have these conversations and how we change people's minds and that kind of thing. Is it something that people kind of have to come to on their own, or can it be something that's outside influence, or is it a mixture of all of that? Like, how does that work, do you think? Bobby or Jerry, whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead, Bobby.
I think it's a mixture of both, because there are so many things in the Bible that the average Christian, and I'm going to use that word, average Christian, never sees. They listen to their pastor, they highlight those scriptures that their pastor says highlight, and then they close their book. I made a comment not too long ago that what led me away from religion was the fact that I read the parts of my Bible that were not highlighted. And that is what started to lead me away. And I think what it comes down to is being able to sit down and have a civil conversation with a Christian family member or a Christian friend and point out those things in the Bible. There's a Christian saying, talk about planting seeds. And I think at some point you start doing that when you're pointing out those things in the Bible that don't make sense to you. You plant that seed in the back of their mind. They may not think about it right now, and you're not going to deconvert them right at the moment. But you want to. But for me, I want to plant something there that they're going to sit back and think about. And I think it's both aspects of it. At least that's my thought on it.
Yeah, you get them to reason with the verses that aren't in red.
Right. Yeah, I had a pretty interesting experience with the whole Christians not knowing the Bible thing. When I was talking with my grandma, and we used to get into theological arguments pretty regularly, and I pulled out the verse in Isaiah where it talks about God sending people in to kill children and take women and all of that. And I read it literally from the Bible. And my grandma looks at me and she goes, "That's not in there." And I'm like, "You've been a Christian for like 50 years. Like, like, what is this?"
Yeah, that's the Old Testament part, though,
Well, that's true. That's true. Jerry, what do you think?
Brings up
go ahead.
Sorry.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that going off of what Bobby said and then what you just added to it is that it's great to have those kind of conversations, but the person on the other end has to be receptive. It has to be the kind of person who actually cares about seeking the truth and is able to change their mind when they're presented with evidence, which it doesn't seem like your grandma in that case was willing to do.
Right.
So, you can point them out all the strange things in the Bible and the contradictions and the burden of proof and all of that. But if they're just so stuck in their beliefs that they don't even really care what's true, unfortunately, it's not going to get through. It's like, someone going to therapy, they're not going to change unless they actually want to help themselves. It's the same sort of thing.
They have to stop wanting to be the king on the hill kind of thing.
So, Jerry, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. The only thing that I would add to it is I feel like that we have two worlds that we live in all the time. We have the outside world and we have the world that's on the inside of us. And we have this symbiotic relationship with it. How we are on the inside has a whole lot to do with what's going on outside, and vice versa. We obviously affect our outside world by what's going on in our minds and in our emotional world. The reason that I emphasize that is because I've seen people presented with the same information that I came across that were completely uninterested and unmoved by the information that moved me. And at first, because I stopped growing at 5'5", so I look for every way I can to make myself feel better.
Right, of course, yeah.
And so at first I'm like, damn, I'm smart. This is, I'm more sincere. I'm more devout. I'm more interested. I'm more whatever than all the other people that aren't moved by it. But when I look back, I really think in so many ways it has more to do with how my outside world affected my inside world. And it just kind of made me more ready. If I was more anything, I was just made more ready to receive that information when it came my way. Because I remember very, very clearly bumping into Dan Barker's book, Losing Faith in Faith, back in the 90s, and going and kind of tossing it aside, maybe partly out of fear, but also just, I just wasn't ready for it. And then you fast forward over 25 years later, and I'm on the phone with Dan Barker, picking his brain and literally being refreshed as a human being by hearing him say to me that it's okay, that I'm not crazy, that yes, and he confirms where I'm at in my life at that moment. So much of what had me one way in the beginning of my spiritual journey and one way at the end has to do with what life did to me as I went along. Now, I'm not totally taking all of my credit away, but the encouragement I get out of that is that there may not be any right way or wrong way to present information and put it out there. I think what's important is that we do put it out there and we keep stockpiling it so that when people's lives bring them into a place of reception, it is there for them to receive.
Let's talk for a second about the consequences, right? Because the title of your guys' show is Hope After Faith, right? So obviously, I think if we're talking about that, we think that there is, and I would argue that there is, and I think we are all good examples of the fact that there is. But I think,
except for me, because I'm miserable all the time.
Well, right, of course, yeah. You're always the exception to every conversation about happiness. So, so I think there's a growing number of people in the atheist movement who don't understand how severe the consequences can be when you lose your faith or when you exit a religious community. And I frankly was one of them, even though I had a mildly religious upbringing. But when I decided I was an atheist, it wasn't really that big of a deal. And like the disappointed look on my grandma's face was probably the worst consequence I dealt with. So, John, if you're okay, I mean, you talked about, not being married anymore, losing a friend. Is there anything else that you've experienced negative as a result, as a consequence of you, not being a person of faith anymore?
I would say probably like the biggest concern of mine, and I still honestly haven't discovered if it's like a legitimate concern of mine or not, but just with my mom and just with other people that I'm really connected with, just the thought of like, so you don't believe that like you're gonna see your grandma again in heaven, kind of thing, and like, so like if that's what you believe, and like just the thought that like you could potentially cause someone to like honestly question their own faith before they're ready to like walk through questioning their own faith,
right?
Just because of you being honest and like upfront with where you're at, like that's been super like hard on me. And then probably the biggest thing right now is that like I have a 5-year-old daughter, and she very much like, you know, wants to pray before bed, and then she's like, "Daddy, pray with me," and I'm like, "Oh,
right,
okay." Like
that's a hard one.
And it's just like, especially if it's like, you know, my, you know, soon-to-be ex-wife is still involved in her church and still pursuing that, and you know, my daughter wants to, and like she wants to do it, and it's not so much like she hasn't expressed that she feels like she's being dragged to it, or you know, and so then it's trying to figure out like where you can have conversations, where you can't have conversations, and just like it adds a layer of trying to mitigate life on top of what you're already kind of going through as far as losing what you've had for so long, kind of thing. So definitely the family aspects when you have kids or a spouse or anything like that's just adds a lot of strain that is really difficult to manage through.
Bobby, you want to talk about what your experience was like? What sort of consequences you faced?
I was outed by my now wife. Most people know that story.
Yep.
The consequences that I faced, they wasn't terrible. Of course, I had to have the conversation with my mom, and she told me that she felt that she failed me, and that it broke her heart that she would not see me in heaven, which started the conversation about if heaven is really a place of bliss and joy. How are you going to be blissful knowing your only child's burning in hell?
Right.
It started that conversation. But I think what I found was I lost one whole half of my family. You know, there was a side of my family that was on the side of my biological father, whom I call my sperm donor, that was trying to reconnect with me. And when word got out that Bobby's a dirty atheist, they don't connect at all. I don't hear from them, nothing. And I think it's at the point now to where if my sperm donor happened to die, they wouldn't tell me, because they don't want anything to do with someone who is not a believer, because they're all very religious, Southern Baptist. You know, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it type of people. Now, I am out about my non-belief at work. I work for a Christian-based company. Every one of our safety messages has the Bible verse of the day on. Oh, yeah, that's real encouraging. Yeah. And every safety briefing has the 10 Commandments up there, and they start it with prayer and, you know, that whole ordeal. And I'm the only one looking around the room while everybody else's head is bowed. But they know where I stand. We've had our conversations. We've had our arguments. And now we've kind of moved away from that. Now everybody kind of just accepts the fact that, hey, he's a heathen. He's nice to everybody. So I try to make sure that they see that I can still be a good person without the concept of a God.
Yeah.
I try to be that example of what a humanist is. And it seems to be working. Now, Jerry had it a hell of a lot harder than I did.
Yeah. I was going to ask, Jerry, you want to talk about that for a minute?
Sure, and I'll try to figure out a way to be really brief about it, because I assume now, after so many years and the book and all of that people are like, yeah, we get it. A bunch of horrible crap happened.
Get over it.
Here he goes again.
Here he goes. Yeah, lost his friends, lost his family, lost his finances, lost favor of the community. We know. But it really, it really was all those things. The only reason that it may have been more intense than some people's stories and not nearly as intense as others is just because I'd been in the ministry for so long. And so that's the only way that so many people knew me. And that made it, it was a lot like a U.S. soldier joining, ISIS or something. It was how did you switch sides? Why are you on the other team? And so obviously there was all those things that I just jokingly referred to. We did lose almost all of our family. We did lose many, many of our friends. Finances is obvious. I had already stopped pastoring by the time that I came out, but I was still in the ministry. I was still traveling and speaking because I'd been in the ministry for 25 years, and so there was a pretty big circuit that I was involved in. And
and it's a paycheck too. Right. I mean, aside from it being something that, your life is centered on, I mean, that's how you paid your bills in 8, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's something that sometimes people take for granted and they get a little cold-hearted about, especially when I first started touring the movement, talking about the Clergy Project in particular. Everyone really wondered why and criticized people who did not get up and the next Sunday, after they realized they were an atheist, tell their whole church that they were an atheist and just move on. But the stories can be very complicated. And the one I always refer to is a Clergy Project member whose wife was on a life-sustaining medicine that cost $4,000 a month. And his only way of paying for that was through the insurance that he had with the church. He's invested now 30 years in this one particular career. The chances of him, before she dies, of just going and getting a brand new job that has that same type of income and insurance to be able to afford that life-sustaining medication is pretty slim. And it actually took years and years and years before even the first possibility surfaced. So it's it's challenging. There's a lot of possibilities for loss. There's a lot of possibilities for being rejected. But there truly, no plug nor pun intended, there truly is hope after faith, because to some degree or the other, everything that you lose, you gain just from another part of your life.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of what I wanted to get into next. We got about 5 minutes or so here left, and what I would love to leave it on that note and talk about where do we find hope? Where do we find comfort? I mean, obviously, we can talk about things like community, because I think community really is the main thing. But I think we can drill down in specifics and talk about how we can be supportive and how we can be helpful to people who are going through this process. So you started the conversation, Jared. Do you want to just go on that?
Well, I'll hit the big one first, and then if Bobby thinks of some details, he's welcome to chime in. For me, I once again feel like this is a test of our humanity, and so even if, for whatever reason, you don't connect with the community, you don't find more fulfilling employment, you don't bring into your life family members, friends, community members, new relationships that support your current beliefs, even if none of those pieces actually came back together in your life, you will always be able to be proud of yourself and have a sense of satisfaction that you could only obtain through walking out this journey and fulfilling your own mission in your life, your own self-actualization and being who you truly are. Because the reality of it is that not only are you only going to see yourself once, but the universe is only going to see you once. And so you really should be the best representation of you that you can be in any situation.
Bobby C., what do you got?
Not much, because he kind of covered it.
Stole the thunder.
But no, I'm glad he did, because he can say it much more eloquently than I can. The only thing that I would probably attach onto that was, regardless of if you ever find a community, regardless if you ever connect up or anything like that, is now you realize that this is the only life you have. That there is no far off heaven that you're working toward now, which gives you this drive for life, because now this is all you've got. So now, knowing that, you can create a life that, first of all, that you're going to love, and you're going to do everything you can to make this life the best you can because you realize this is it.
Ari, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much the same thing as Bobby was going to say, and I just want to add on a little bit that it's not only that it's the only life that you have, but it's also the only life that everyone around you has. So I feel a greater sense of urgency to, be involved in my community, to do volunteering, to do activism, to do humanism. It's definitely made me much more of a humanist now that I don't believe in an afterlife, because not only is this the only life I'm going to have, but also everyone else around me probably, as far as I know, isn't going to have an afterlife either. So I want to do my best to make the world a better place for them to live in, and to make them feel loved and supported, and be able to enjoy their lives to the fullest extent, and be who they want to be, just like I want to be who I want to be, because I don't have an afterlife.
I think that sums it up perfectly. John, I'm going to give you the last word. What are your thoughts? So how do you feel being basically at the beginning of your journey as a person who, obviously the rest of us are pretty far along in this whole thing. So how are you feeling about the whole thing, and what the future holds and what the future looks like for you?
I think the hardest thing, I would probably start there, is switching over from, because Christianity is very much about, Christ-centered. So, Christ is supposed to be what helps you fulfill your life, and, you following him and what he wants and all these other things and all this. And so it's a difficult switch from going to that to then you being, the thing that's going to fulfill your life. You're no longer relying on this, outside spiritual thing that's going to, motivate you. And it's a difficult switch, because Christianity does say that, you're not supposed to look into yourself. You're not supposed to look at yourself for your happiness, for your joy, for your determination, for your... And so just being encouraged that it's okay to look at yourself, to find your own happiness and your own joy, and the things that you want to be a part of to make the world better is really what I'm trying to concentrate on. And I think it's a really important place, as far as what I've discovered already, to start before you move on into a bigger, philosophical type of, view or whatever. So start with yourself and then move on from there. So
that's awesome. John, I want to thank you a whole lot for coming on to the show. And it was not exactly short notice, but I know this whole thing is pretty new, and it takes a lot of guts to come onto a show and talk so openly and honestly about the things that you're going through.
Something that you're not sure where you're at with yet, and have it be recorded into very easily edited sound bites is very intimidating.
That's what Callie does. Selectively edits people.
Yeah, you're all going to be advocating for kicking puppies at the end of this whole thing. I just want to let you know that
puppies once.
Hey, I'm not against that.
Oh, no.
And John, I do have one little quick 30-second piece of advice, maybe 3-second piece of advice. Always feel comfortable with giving yourself a disclaimer. And I mean that with all sincerity. When someone's asking you, where are you at? What do you believe? What's your label? Don't be ashamed of giving yourself a disclaimer, because if I could be known for anything today, my life kind of went on its own path, and I'm glad that I'm where I'm at. But instead of being known as an atheist, I would much prefer to be known as a seeker and a humanist. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not really as interested in everybody's damn answers as I am in the questions that the universe continuously provides me.
Darwin.
Darwin. Oh my God, Bobby. You're my favorite person. You need to know that.
Everyone already knew that. I'm super jealous.
I'm jealous too.
God. Bobby and Jerry, co-hosts of the Hope After Faith podcast. Thank you both. I love you both dearly.
We love you too, and thank you for having us.
And you want to talk for a second about where you can find the show?
Guys, you can find Hope After Faith live every Thursday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. I have to remember that now, because I used to say Eastern Standard and I got corrected. Eastern Daylight Time on Spreaker.com. And also you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker. and come join us live in the chat room. We enjoy the conversations with the listeners as we do the show.
Well, that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. Definitely want to thank all my guests for their time and for their honesty. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheist. And Ari's going to make us all hate them that much more.
Thanks for subscribing to Potato Facts, your source for facts about America's favorite vegetable. As a subscriber, you'll receive hourly texts with the hottest and crispiest info about the world's most beloved tuber. Reply TOTS to upgrade to our premium loaded subscription, and even get more factoids. Additional charges apply. Reply Hitler did nothing wrong to unsubscribe. It's your 11 a.m. Potato Fact. Did you know that the largest potato on record was over 7 pounds in weight? That's a whole lot of latkes. It's your 12 p.m. Potato Fact. Americans are well known for their love of potatoes, but Germans actually eat twice as many potatoes on average per year. Can't be number one at everything, America. Potatoes will always be number one in our hearts and our stomachs. It's your 1 p.m. Potato Fact. Did you know that there's an official Facebook group for potato lovers? You can chat with like-minded people, exchange recipes, and even plan acts of revolution away from the prying eyes of the authorities. Find and friend Ari Stillman on Facebook for more details. It's your 2 p.m. Potato Fact. The potato is the only vegetable in the world that naturally emits a 420 Hz frequency, which is the resonant frequency of the human cell. As a result, potatoes can cure cancer. Wowie zowie zoo! You indicated that you want to unsubscribe, but we hate to see you go, and we're counting on you to fight alongside us in the upcoming revolution. We're offering you a free trial of our premium loaded subscription. You'll receive your potato facts every half hour. Reply, corn is the devil's dildo to unsubscribe. It's your 2:30 p.m. Potato Fact. If you keep a potato in a whiskey barrel at 83 degrees for 5 to 6 days, it will turn into an Irish person. It's your 3 p.m. Potato Fact. How many potatoes do you think you can fit into your 3-hole? Email a picture to aristillman4@gmail.com. Don't worry, it's totally confidential, and we'll only use it to assign you to a rank in the military battalion. You indicated that you would like to unsubscribe. You're making a big mistake, Fries, but we won't worry. We know you'll be back after the uprising begins and you find yourself against the wall with nowhere to escape. Until then, have a smashing day.
Jesus Christ.
Damn. Now I see why you and Jeremiah go back and forth. I understand.
Yeah.
Damn.
So if you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto and make a per-episode donation, as little as $1 per episode. If that's not in the cards, you can also leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes. That helps us get heard by a lot more people. We greatly appreciate it. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares or no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.